Good afternoon, Year 3. I just thought I'd show you a video of the main parts of Brio so you can have a look at it at your leisure. Now, a lot of this material has been produced recently, so hopefully if you've not had a chance to study this, then you can do so at your leisure. So what we're going to do first is open up the Brio shell, and you can see there is the message. On the left hand side are all the important things. Now again, if you want a simplified version of how the unit is shaping together, you can click on the unit information form, and when you do that, you can see it will give you an overview of what the unit is about. So let's have a quick look at that. So if we now go through it, you can now see that there are a few things there, but probably the thing that you're most interested in will be the assignments. Now if you have a look there, you can see there are two assignments for this. The first is the proposal and the second is the actual dissertation itself. Now the first thing to notice, if you have a look, the proposal has a 0% weighting. Still has to be done by the deadline, but it won't make a contribution to your overall grade. On the other hand, the study is 100% of the final grade, and you can see there that it's 8,000 words. Now as time goes on, you'll have opportunity to look at some of those dissertations and see the style that they are presented with. That's really important. It's also worth being mindful of the fact that you are able to look at them at any point you choose, and to do that there are details in the slides as to who to email. Alison, our technician, is available at certain times to show you those, and it might be very helpful. Now one of the things you've got to realise is that at your level 6, that's year 3, you'll be expected to research independently, and where there's a section, the idea being that there are sufficient resources on the website, on the Brio rather, to enable you to find out how to complete each of the sections yourself. Now, whilst it might sound a little harsh, that is a requirement of level 6 study. So again, we're all here to help you, but don't be surprised if some of the things you have to find a bit of time researching yourself. That's what this video is about. The next section is guided learning, so if we click on that, you'll see there everything is ordered chronologically. So you can see there the materials from induction, the induction weeks are there. You may have already seen those together before rather. It's also worth being mindful that some of this material will be long forgotten, so it's worth just revisiting that to start to look at things. Now probably the biggest help is to look at old dissertations and to see the order that they've done it in, which will tell you what to look up, but hopefully the titles of those folders will give you some kind of information about what's in them. Now you can see there also there are the forthcoming lectures. You'll see this one will be in that one there, the January the 7th lecture one online, and you can see there the next few weeks are mapped out, particularly what they're about. Now likewise, you can see there are a few things like essential documents. So if we click on there, you'll see there is some reference material for ethics, proposal form again with notes and so on. So that's worth thinking about. If we go back a stage, have a look at it, really it's an opportunity to explore different things. Research method text, so where you're explaining why you've chosen things, you'll see there, if we click on that there will be some hyperlinks to the website, so the library website rather, the purpose of which there is to enable you to quickly access some of the most useful research texts. So those should provide you access to ebooks, so you don't even have to go to the library. But it's worth just saying in that text there at the top, it's worth just saying that sometimes it's worth going to the library because some research methods texts are more suitable than others. Now why you might want to use research methods text is so that when you are exploring how you are undertaking your research, you can justify your approach with appropriate reference material. So in many ways they aren't necessarily the most exciting of reads, but they do enable you to justify why you are doing particular things. The next information, of course, is ethics. And so in other words, you have to really basically understand that ethics are concerned with ensuring that you act in accordance with the ethical frameworks that are typical of education. Those being BERA is the main one, but there are others. Now again, it's worth being mindful of what form ethics sections take. So again, it's your best friend here might well be existing dissertations to see the format that it's is used. So if I click on that, you'll see there you have BERA ethical guidelines and so on and so forth. So you can see there aren't just BERA, there are others. So it might well be worth exploring those in a little bit more detail to make that section as rich as possible. Now, again, carrying on, if we go through there, right to the bottom, you'll find there are some other materials such as sources of other information. It says useful journals and other sources of information. So click on there and you can see there are a range of reference materials that you could search if you so wish. Now, what I'll also do in a minute is show you the journal database, just in case in the period that you have been away from university, you may have forgotten. So the first thing you need to do is to type into a search engine, or you could use the left-hand toolbar of Brio. Just type in University of Bedfordshire Library and you'll come up with this. The next thing then is to click on the digital library. Databases for my subject. One of the things you want to look at is education, and then click go. Once you've done that, in a very short amount of time, you'll find it says databases for my subject. Remember that you've selected education. Now, quite often people click discover, and that's a general database for research papers and the like. But if you go a bit further down, you'll see there are some more detailed education databases in the order that you're likely to want to tackle them with. So I'm going to click on Education Research Complete. And if I now click on that, you'll find you have two links here. Now you can either click on the first one. Now it depends which identification you want to use. The first one uses, hang on, let's wait for it. The first one uses your library identification number. If you've got that on your ID, you can use that. If you want to go back, you can actually use the other one, which uses, if I go down there, click on there, that uses your single sign-in login. So again, if I click on that and wait a while, you will find that, there we go, that's my student login. So you click on sign in. But either way, if I do that, most of the time, they will end up with, oh, here we go, doesn't quite like that, but nonetheless, eventually you'll get there. You will end up with a searchable database. There we go. So what you can see is there you can add various search terms. And what's really important is, if you're searching literature, it would be a good idea to keep a note of the search terms you've used in a table. This is common practice in the world of education. Anyway, so if I just type in there, math, so M-A-T-H. Now, if I wanted any word starting with maths, then, or math rather, what I can then do is put an asterisk. This is a useful thing. And then what that will do is any phrase that begins with math, and it could be mathematics or mathematical or and so on and so forth. If I go then click on search, then what I could do is, let's wait for it, wait for the results to come up, and you can see that you can have options there to select a full text. So I could click on that one, updating, so it will then come up with, now you can see there it's still got 103,000, and then what I might want to do is if I go down, it says publication date. Now you've got 1901 to now, of course that's going to be very old-fashioned, so you might want to think, well, when's the last time something was similar to how it is now? Perhaps you might say 2010. There you go. And if I now wait a little bit, it's still taking it to 48,072. So you can see there, I think, well, that's quite a lot. So what I might want to do is think about primary. So if I want to type in primary, I can do that, like so. Primary school, or it might be primary education. And then what this means is, obviously as you go along, you'll find that there are lots of different synonyms available, and therefore it's worthwhile keeping a note of those. So if I now take off that, you can now to 1000 and whatever, and then you might think, right, let's now think about girls. I want to think about that, and let's now see what comes up there. Girls or women or females, that does the job. So if I'm thinking about maths and girls and females and go on search, you can see now, well, let's see what that turns up with. It goes to 168. So nonetheless, obviously some of these things might not be relevant, and some of them might not necessarily have hyperlinks to their full text, but nonetheless you can see there that might be a really useful way of refining your search. You might find that if you do it that way, you can get to the more interesting articles more quickly, because you remember one of the things you've got to decide is whether they are relevant or not relevant to this study that you intend to do. So it's worth thinking about that. Returning back to the left-hand menu, if I click on assessment and feedback, so click on there, you'll see there are some assignment materials. Now you can see there this year we have a folder for the assignment 1, which is the ethical approval form, and then sign 2 is the actual dissertation. You can see there the dates are due. You can also see there are 2 Turnitin links and so on. So if we now go back up there, I've accidentally pressed the wrong thing there, but if we now click on there, you will see that we have this assignment 1. So we click on there, due the 22nd of January rather. So if I click on that one, you will see there's a lot of information. And what we're going to do this year is we're going to use this top form, and you are going to submit it via Turnitin for the date. So let's have a look at that. There we go. And let's now wait for it to arrive, like so. Right, once it loads up, you'll end up with this. Now, there's 2 parts to this. The first part is the proposal, in other words, what you intend to do. Now, you may remember this from the introductory sessions. You can see there, it tells you how big each of the sections should be. So if you have a quick look at that, you can see that that is there as a guide. At the end, you can see that a number of people have to sign it. First of all, you may see that there you have to sign it. Your dissertation supervisor has to sign it, and that is to make sure that the proposal offers an achievable basis for a research project. So clearly, it isn't in your interests for a dissertation supervisor to sign anything at all. They sometimes might have to put their foot down and be a little bit harsh and say, well, actually, the way that you intend to find out this information is not going to answer your research questions. So you've either got to change the research questions, or you've got to change the means by which you're going to find it out. So they might sound as though they are being a little harsh, but sometimes that's going to be helpful, particularly in the early stages. It's worth bearing in mind that a lot of the thinking for a project like this is very time consuming. So you might feel as though you haven't done it, or things aren't moving very fast, but don't forget that a lot of the effort for this is involved in thinking. That can be when you can't sleep at night, when you're driving to university, anywhere. So as long as you're constantly thinking about it, that's no bad thing. The actual process of typing this up might take a couple of hours or thereabouts, but the process of thinking about what you're doing is very time consuming. So the dissertation supervisor would have to sign there. You also need to ensure that the research host, that's the school that you intend to do it in, has signed and dated it as well. Now, the reason why that's important is because the school have got to be happy that the project you intend to undertake isn't going to cause the school any problems. Now, again, just because you have signed it and the dissertation supervisor has signed it doesn't mean that there's something about that project that the school, or it doesn't mean that it's something that the school is going to automatically approve it. We've had these two signed before, but a school has overturned the decision and said, no, we're not happy with this. And if that's the case, you've either got to accept that and make some adjustments or find a different location. That's not always easy. Some people find it a lot easier to find research schools than others. Now here is a section where the seminar tutor signs it. So that's to give a second opinion, if you like. So when all of these things are signed, then what that suggests is that everybody has looked at this, it seemed to be reasonable, and we're happy with it. At that point, it can be submitted. Okay, now if we carry on down the page, now remember that section there was about whether or not the project was achievable, whether it's a sensible and well-designed project. The other thing we've got to think about is whether or not it is ethically appropriate. Now, this section isn't as bad as you might think. Some things are a bit clear-cut, some things are a little bit controversial. So, for example, if you wanted to research which names are likely to misbehave, that's going to offend anyone with that name, so clearly that's not going to work. If you wanted to explore children's reflections of a maths lesson, that is unlikely to offend anyone, and clearly you will, that is more likely to be ethically sound. So what you have to do is you have to fill in this, and you need to think about, and it's really, there's a bit of duplication here, but unfortunately that's the way that it is. So you've got to give a brief description of your project. You've got to think about what research projects you're going to, or what research tools you're going to use. And if we go down there, potential ethical issues. So again, you'll need to look those up. What do these things mean? So what are these? So you have to tick them. And you might want to think about which of the projects or which of the following ethics frameworks will be used to inform the ethical practice. Now, you might remember previously there was a section on that on Brio, so you might want to have a look at that. And then basically what you've got to do is think about how you might overcome any potential issues that you see and fill in the form appropriately. So again, you can see there the section to sign by you, the student, the research host, the seminar tutors, and obviously the overall decision will be reached when you submit. Now, the combination of both sections of this form really provide the contents for assignment 2. So probably the best way of doing it is, you can see there, it might well be that you can do most of that typed, but this bit where you perhaps have to have it signed might well be a separate page which you can scan, and then you can copy and paste that into the main document. Do be mindful, of course, though, but that might be open to some kind of a malpractice, so we may choose to look at that if we are suspicious. Now, what might arise suspicion is if an unethical project is deemed to be ethically appropriate. So again, when you submit that, the panel will meet and we'll talk about that if there are any controversial ones. So overall then, this is the document that once filled in will be your dissertation proposal, both sections. Right, still doesn't necessarily mean that it's clear, so the next thing I'm going to show you is the guidelines to help. If we go back to the original folder for assignment 1, you'll see there's a link that says how to fill in the proposal form. So we're going to click on that and we're going to look at the document that creates. Now you may prefer to start off with this one and then replace the one on the blank proposal form if that suits you. Here is the guidelines, and you can see here are the guidelines rather, and you can see there that the italicised writing gives a brief explanation of what should go in each section. So you can see there that as we go through, there are some guidelines. Now, luckily, the words will tell you roughly how much time you should spend on it. So again, you can see 100 words isn't going to take too much to write. When you're finished, obviously, if you are, you might want to do a brief word count to check. Now, one of the issues that we often face is this one of literature and methodology. Now, later on in the slideshow, you will see that these are discovered and explored in a little bit more detail. But one of the things that is clear is a lot of people see these two things as being a bit of an inconvenience. Now, the better that your literature is, the easier it will be to convince the person reading this that you've thought about it properly. So, for example, if you're using technology, you need to be very specific. You need to use literature that's going to hit the spot perfectly. Don't just use general technology literature. You might want to look at specific school-based technology in UK primary schools, and then you can make sure that you are considering all the things that there are to consider. Now, again, when you look at the dissertations, you'll see how this has been used, but it's worth being mindful that this is where a lot of time is going to be spent. Don't rush it. It's not just a reference list, but basically it's about thinking about the key things that are going to be useful for your project. That key paragraph being the last one, it says essentially this section should be an annotated reference list of about 12 to 14 key sources that you've identified, okay, and explain why each is relevant to your project. And that way it is very, very focused. Now, hopefully you might then be put in mind of how precise your journal searches can be, and therefore you can see that using the journal database is massively important. You need something that's up to date, research that's carried out in a very similar context to your own, so that you can start to explore what extra your research will bring to the melting pot, so to speak. You can see there research or proposed methodology. So again, what are you going to do? Are you doing a case study? Now, you might have heard of that, but you'll have to use some of those research methods books to further understand what that's about. You might also revisit some of the slides we looked at in the introductory seminars. All these might sound familiar, hopefully, but you're going to have to delve a little bit deeper to explain why you have chosen those approaches. Now, what you might find also is that some of the research methods literature might feel as though it's a little inaccessible. So perhaps you might want to look on YouTube first so that things can be explained in a simpler way, and then once you know vaguely what it's talking about, you can look for the detail. Now, although it's only 200 words, remember that it's going to take a lot of reading to create those 200 words, because obviously you've got to demonstrate that you are clear about what your approach is going to be. Now, one of the things that you might want to think about is, if you're doing a questionnaire, you might have seen written in the ethical part of the form that you might want to think about what questions are you going to ask. And sometimes schools might ask you to elaborate on the questions you're going to use, because that's massively important. For example, if you decide that you're going to interview pupils about their attitudes to school, you could actually create a bit of a problem if you ask questions that allow school to be exposed to some kind of criticism. So you need to choose your words carefully. Right, okay. Now, research, participants and sampling, again, that should be fairly straightforward. Ethical considerations, again, that's duplicated with the second part. So again, what's there will also be useful. Now, you might also note that if you're going to interview parents, for example, or you're going to do something that's outside of normal classroom practice, you might need to ask parents about it. And this is an opportunity for you to ask your supervisor, or it might be an opportunity for you to speak to the school. Okay, hopefully you will also be able to fill in the rest reasonably easily, but you can see there's opportunity there for an appendices timeline. Make sure you don't run out of time. If you're transcribing interviews, for example, you'll be surprised how long that takes. So it's worth allowing plenty of time for that. Right, now the other thing to be mindful of is references. Now, one of the things that you'll find is that as you get towards the end of your dissertation, just as you're running out of steam, you might find that you haven't done those. So whilst you're making use of the journal database, it would be a good idea to reference the materials correctly. So that's one job left to do, one less job to do later on, because as you run out of steam, it will seem harder. You're probably likely to be fresher now than you'll ever be for the rest of the year, so it's worth doing those fiddly little tasks first. Now, we've mentioned the things you need to have signed, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. Finally, you can see there the Turnitin link to submit this by the 22nd, and it says a completed proposal form, the one I've just shown you, the one at the top there of that form, of the folder rather, and it's also worth being mindful that you can't collect data until you have had ethical approval. The other thing to be mindful, and let's just be clear about this, you can type the document, but clearly the signatures will have to be scanned. Okay. Finally, should it arise, for the next few weeks, your seminar groups are on this page here. It's an announcement on the 28th of September. Now, the groups will have changed, obviously. Not the groups, rather. The rooms will have changed. So, basically, Steve's and Melini's groups are in L7 and L4. Melini is L7, which is the small one with a wooden bench. Steve is L4, which is the big, long grey one. And then I'll be in K1. I'll be in K1 because of the fact that my group is smaller. Okay, thank you very much. And remember, if there's any thing you need any help with, please do not hesitate to send an email to peter.vernals@beds.ac.uk.